Let me tell you a true story about the mysteries of death. My mother battled ovarian cancer, a fight that stretched on for years. Watching her go through that was one of the hardest things I've ever experienced. On her last day, she was so weak and I had to help her with everything. I remember helping her to the bathroom. And as I carried her back to bed, she looked up at me, exhausted, but with a glint of humor in her eye, and said, "Well, that's the last shit I'm ever gonna have." My mom wasn't the type to use that language, and hearing her say it made me smile through the sadness. She was right, though. That was the last time, but her very last words to me were much more powerful. She turned to me with that little strength that she had left and said, "I love you." And then, not that long later, she was gone. Physically at least. That moment, watching someone you love slip away, stays with you. You can't help but wonder, is that really it? Is death truly the end? Or is there something more? Hey, this is Steve again, and today we're diving into that huge question. What happens after we die? And before we get into it, I want to know what you think happens. Do we continue on in some way, or is it just lights out? Post a comment below because I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. If you stick with me, you'll see how both religious beliefs and scientific discoveries can work together in surprising ways. You'll walk away with a new way of thinking about life and death, and I promise this perspective will get you thinking. And don't forget to like and subscribe while you're here if you're enjoying it so far. Now, we've all wondered what really happens when the lights go out. Is it just nothing? Or do we somehow continue to see, feel, and understand? Some people who've been there right on the edge came back with stories that might just give you some chills. And let's talk about what science has discovered. Near-death experiences, maybe you've heard about them. People often describe floating above their bodies, watching everything happening below. They hear conversations, they see things that they couldn't possibly have known about while they were unconscious. Or worse, clinically dead. That sounds far-fetched, right? Yeah, but here's where it gets interesting. There are documented cases where people who were declared dead for several minutes later recounted events that happened all around them. And the details they shared, they were spot on. One man in the AWARE study, the Awareness During Resuscitation study, led by Dr. Parnia, was clinically dead for several minutes. He described floating above his body, watching the medical team work on him. He remembered the sounds of the machines, the exact words the doctors exchanged, and even how they moved around him. And here's the kicker. When he was brought back, everything he described was verified by the medical staff and records. You can explain it any way you want. No heartbeat, no brain activity, yet he saw and heard it all. How do we explain that? And this isn't an isolated case. In another study published in the Lancet, patients who had been declared clinically dead also described events they could not have seen or heard, yet their descriptions were perfectly accurate and confirmed by doctors and family members. These stories challenge everything we think we know about consciousness and the brain. Now, here's where things get even more fascinating. Quantum physics tells us that energy doesn't just disappear. It transforms. Picture it like this. When a wave crashes onto the shore, it doesn't vanish. It becomes part of the ocean again, moving in a different form. Well, what if our very souls behave the same way? What if when we die, the energy that makes us who we are simply transitions into something else? Look, I am not saying I know for sure what happens when we die. In fact, all I know for certain is that I don't know for certain. But until I do, I'm keeping an open mind. How about you? If you want to dive deeper into the research behind all of this, I've put together my notes and I've posted them in the video description so you can explore the science and ideas for yourself. There's a lot more to this conversation than meets the eye. So, how can a religious view of heaven and a scientific view of energy transformation exist at the same time? Well, what if they're both part of the same story? What if science is explaining the mechanics of how our energy, our soul, transitions, while religion gives it a name and a purpose? I mean, heaven, after all, might just be a spiritual way of describing something we don't fully understand yet. One doesn't have to cancel out the other. In fact, they might be two sides of the same coin. Now, there's only one story I know where someone had a death experience and came back sometime later, and his name began with a J. And let's just say that story's been around for a while. But seriously, whether we transition into heaven, transform into energy, or something else entirely, one thing is for sure: we don't know yet. And that's okay. The mystery of what happens after we die might be more beautiful and complex than we can imagine. And until we know for sure, why close the door on any possibility? Here's the real question. What are we doing with the time we've got? My mother's final words to me weren't about what comes next. They were about love and what truly matters while we're still here. Here's the surprise ending. Maybe the most important thing isn't figuring out what happens after we die, but learning how to live while we're here. If our energy or our soul lives on in some form, what we do now echoes into whatever comes next. And I guess the takeaway from this is that while we might have strong opinions or faith about what happens, we don't have any scientific facts to back it up. Yet. We'll just have to keep hunting, and hopefully the afterlife comes with unlimited streaming and no commercials. And now, you know more of the story. Hey, if you like this video, watch this one to continue your journey. Until next time, see ya.